Hi, welcome back to our reading of The Red Lion by Maria Schepers. If you listen to the last chapter, you may remember the grotesque ending. So our protagonist died again. This business of reincarnation is kind of exhausting in many ways, but at least we follow his progress and his learnings, as I'm sure we've all had our own, although we are not as cognitive and conscious about what we've been through as he is. Now, unfortunately, in this chapter, which is way shorter than chapter 24, things aren't really getting nicer, but it's now a segue into the next book, within the book, into the third book, where he will start his, I guess you could call it, his ascent into a higher state of being eventually. So I thought the song I picked up last time is still appropriate for what we are going to follow his soul go through this time, the circle of hands. About a sky full of eyes, minds full of lies, black from their cold hearts down to their graves. Circle of hands, cold spirits plan, searching my land for an enemy. Came across love's sweet cause, and in the face of beauty, evil was lost. Sky full of eyes, minds full of lies, black from their cold hearts down to their graves. Murdered at dawn, spreading their scorn, cursing the sun on which love was born. We must keep them away, or pretty soon we'll pay and count the cost in sorrow. Sacrifice, the future has its price, and today is only yesterday's tomorrow. And so we must go on. Chapter 25 is called The Green Window. And when I first saw that, I thought it was a green widow because Corinna has just been widowed, but she might not even have noticed. So, at the end of last chapter, of course, Rosalie and Le Pitre were dead. And we saw Louis de la Tourzel take his last breath. And here we go. Chapter 25, The Green Window. The next part of my journey was the strangest and the least easily told. I can try to describe it in words, but words are too rigid to hold the endless colors and terrifying intensity of the lower reaches of the astral world, the seat of passions and suppressed instincts. Later, I will tell about the higher planes of the astral world where intelligence calls to art and the great masterpieces are born. The instant I died, my whole being flew back to Corinna as though it were flung from a suddenly released spring. I was chained to her by every desire of my lacerated body. The being imprisoned on this astral plane is subjected to a sensual hunger far above the capacity of any human physique. Each sense is a high-tension wire carrying more voltage than can be borne by any human system. The astral body remains forever unfulfilled and feeds on the tiniest scraps of the finite world. Now, I was chained to the legion of demons which surrounded Corinna's glowing body, helping to fuel her desires and sharing the pleasures she grasped. I saw her live her whole life and could not turn away for an instant, although I was revulsed with horror. The whole demon pack of my thoughts, desires, and sins revolved about me as I watched. I had many companions at this Black Witches' carnival. I recognized the handsome Marcel, who had been squeezed out of his body by a noose, and Le Pitre and Rosalie revolving like moons of endless despair. Corinna's fate unfolded on the vast stage of life before us, just like a pornographic thriller. She dressed and undressed, put on and took off masks, laughed and screamed, lied and destroyed, made love, gambled, and drank, grasping pleasures from every depraved passion. But it was really the demons who controlled her. As time went on, their technique in handling their puppet became ever more flawless, and her tough body tolerated the debaucheries well, for her soul was still asleep. Her wealth was not so fortunate. It dwindled rapidly in her mad card games, regardless of how generous her lovers were. She continued completely barren, her womb barricaded to new life, and her years continued to burn out like straw. Martin Allais was with her constantly, and she tolerated his presence with equanimity, for she sensed her kin in his intrepid depravity. He never had intercourse with her, but always witnessed the act, and his bulging eyes, burning with the red haze, began to excite Corinna more than anything else. She drew him into her vilest bacchanalias and would tempt him by getting him alone in her bedroom, stripping and reciting the Assis pornographic verse. But Allais remained steadfast. This gourmet of evil, who had produced an especially destructive theory about the beauty and redeeming necessity of sin, resisted Corinna's siege like a castle. He simply offered flattery, encouragement, criticism, and advice as required, blackmailed her, and stayed with her. When she bathed, he would improvise cynical but provocative verses about every part of her body. At last, Corinna became more interested in him than she was in anybody else. Allais was a terribly clever scoundrel. He was willing to put in tedious years to gain the whole prize. He disciplined his Latin temper, suppressed his desire, and conquered his vindictive jealousy. Finally, he got what he wanted. It was an imposing accomplishment, even if it was an accomplishment of evil. And Corinna fell into the trap. The starved and bewitched woman thought there must be some exotic joy in Allais' embrace, so she obeyed him and threw out Germain, that less dangerous evil spirit who was faithful in her own way. She began to live with Allais publicly and gave him the keys of her bedroom and strongbox. Allais didn't wait too long to let Corinna know the truth. He knew he had caged a beautiful beast of prey who would soon want to break loose into freer hunting grounds. So now he systematically imprisoned her. He locked up her money and clothing and turned out all her friends. If she rebelled or escaped briefly, he beat her so brutally she had to stay in bed for days, secretly charmed by the experience. For Ale had no illusions about her. He knew that no one man, regardless of how passionate and sophisticated his technique of lovemaking, could possibly satisfy Corinna. So he dragged her into perversions so ugly she began crying and begging for mercy. But the more painful surprise for Corinna was the infection of her blood. Ale's ugly blemishes had meant nothing to one unaccustomed to observing with her brain. It was the syphilis that cracked the callousness of her soul. She was 40 when the disease became visible. Her insane debaucheries had aged her faster than most women, but while she had had her health, she had been able to fight the ravages of time. Now, her skin became slack and she was troubled with rashes. The dark shadows under her eyes became blue bags. The breasts of which she had been so proud grew flabby. Now the eyes that had once glittered with conscious beauty were dull and confused with fright. Her teeth began falling from the inflamed gums, and her voice grew raspy. The shiny black hair that had sparkled with life became a dull gray. About the same time, she lost all her money. Ale, now toothless and bald from his disease, took the rest of her jewels and money and left her alone with her blind panic. Nor was he the only one who left this shell stripped of beauty, wealth, and health. Even her demons left her. No one wanted Corinna any longer. People shunned the staggering beggar woman with the raspy voice. She looked 90, and she wasn't even 50. The spirits of Lepître and Rosalie were freed from their bondage around her. They began to make their search for repentance in new bodies. Only the handsome Marcel remained. Something bound his soul to this decaying form. And as for me, the experience was shattering, and I wish I could convey the full meaning of the word, majestic. The only similar experience I had had was my liberation from homunculus, and this had been a longer process, lasting years by human reckoning. As Corinna's sensual beauty disintegrated, so did the ties between us, and I was no longer bound by blind passion. It wasn't just that she had lost her charm, but what had happened to her had marked me like the bluestone brand of the old Greek initiation mysteries. I had been shocked out of my astral days by witnessing the transitory form and inevitable disintegration of even the most triumphant beauty. Now I understand that carnal pleasure and self-centered lust were all hopeless illusions, and that those fireworks of emotion and sentiment were satanic in essence, carrying deadly peril in their wake. I understand. But the word is too feeble. It means something different to everybody. What I mean is that I understand it with my feelings, so that I was free of a bondage that could hold me only while I believed it could. I might have resisted its force and been frightened of it before, but I had believed in it more than I believed in God. Now I didn't. This cool gust of knowledge tore the burning Fata Morgana to bits, for I saw that all suffering, bondage, affection, terror, misery, sickness, and death are merely illusions. They have no power until we give it to them with our belief. When I recognized this truth, I uttered the real name of the astral passion, just as I had once uttered homunculus's real name to get mastery over him. Now I was free of the bonds of the inferior physical and astral planes. In Corinna's body, the lowest point on the astral plane, I untied the knot on which every man must stumble. True experience can come only from within. We must become one with each experience to free ourselves of all its dangers. Anyone who has passed through the netherworld has been delivered from hell, and anyone who thinks he can stroll across the abyss on a narrow plank will invariably fall in. All the lambs, Le Pitre, Rosalie, Banet, and the others, stood on this bridge dizzy but blustering and thought they could go straight to heaven. But they turned out to be wrong. Le Pitre and Rosalie had fallen headlong into the hottest cauldron. I was moved with compassion as I thought of the experiences they would have to undergo to find their way out. I was not in the enchanting moment of grace of which human beings have such ridiculous and erroneous notions. Grace is really the law that turns evil into medicine and makes the nadir of sin and death the beginning of illumination. Not even God can take a single step for a man or cancel any of his debts or remove a burden from his shoulders as an act of favoritism. Then the unfinished experience would remain terra incognita on the map of the soul and leave a dangerous gap which darkness could penetrate at any time. Now I had 2 of the keys of Hermes, but I needed the 3rd. Now the demons of the astral world couldn't frighten or subdue me any longer because I wasn't afraid of them. I knew they depended on me for existence. I had created them and I was their master. I could simply confront them and make them vanish like mist. I had come the long way around, but it had been worth the trouble. I couldn't have avoided it anyway. It had been inevitable ever since my journey began by Rochard's crushed skull. Being afraid of something makes you a magnet for that of which you are afraid. If you stop being afraid, the magnetic attraction ceases. I stayed with Corinna a little longer out of compassion, but then I realized that her suffering and fear were simply the labor pains of her rebirth from a miserable demon into a human being who could be enlightened by suffering. This freed me from my useless hesitancy, and I left her quietly, for I could not help her yet. Now, I needed an inconspicuous contemplative life to rest from the depths to which I had finally descended and gather my forces to conquer the most difficult plane of all, the mental plane. Now, I was nothing but ashes and exhaustion, an astral body covered with barely healed burns. My new task was to ignite this almost extinguished alchemist furnace to a white-hot glow for a different type of catharsis with a different fire. Before I move on, I must say a few words about Jeanne Girard, for her fate is a notable example of the dangers of dilettantes experimenting with the dark forces. I was able to observe her later life through the green window just as I did Corinna's, and to see much more of it than I could have in my physical body, even possessed of the dubious advantage of the third eye of Atlantean man. My body had tied me to time and place, and now these did not trouble me. If I wanted to learn something about Jeanne Girard, Madame Cotte, she was revealed to me immediately in her total internal and external environment, just like an exotic fish in an X-rayed bowl. The woman really did possess occult abilities, but her self-propagating lies had dragged her down into a low, dense layer of existence. Lying in the deep waters of the astral region, she became an illuminated passageway for electric flounders and deadly cold monsters. In the deep, the light turns into irresistible but destructive heat, a sad, faraway reflection of the divine brilliance. This is why even wild beasts prowl longingly yet fearfully around fires. These are their mute, desperate prayers. Thus, Jeanne's soul became filled with elemental monsters. They penetrated the witch's kitchen that was her body and soul and broke into the indescribably delicate mechanism of life. Every lever was pulled by a different talon until yet a stronger pushed it aside. In modern medical terms, what Jeanne suffered was a singularly severe case of schizophrenia. She shattered into innumerable personalities and spoke in diverse and terrifying voices. Hostile and alien beings gave tongue through her mouth. The conflicting voices she heard caused her to do numerous inappropriate things. Once she stood facing the wall for hours without accepting food or cleaning herself. Another time she hid everything she could lay her hands on in a variety of unlikely places, and then could not remember where she had put them. Frequently she alarmed the servants and confused Corte with disgusting perverted propositions. When the couple had still been active socially, her demon had caused her to utter obscene blasphemies and confess to vile crimes. As her condition became more acute, she began to set fires and smash things. Then she tried to strangle poor Corte, who was barely able to save himself. She wound up where my poor mother had, the Salpêtrière. Once Jeanne recognized me in a rare moment of lucidity. She was in a stupor, but she raised her arms shakily towards me and muttered, "And you, Louis? Monsieur de la Tourzel? You want me to give a message to little Corinna? I won't tell her how scarred and grey you look. I'll tell her something nice to make her glad." Suddenly she shuddered and screamed, aware of her own misery. "Monsieur, for the mercy of God, please help me. You aren't one of them. They've been blocked out a few minutes. They're stealing my life, tearing me apart. Please stop them before it's too late. Please extinguish that lamp." Then her reason was swept away, and she burst into hoarse laughter. So that was chapter 25, and the next time we will start the third book in the book, which is called The Phoenix Soars. Sounds like good news. It'd be good to have some good news here. Thank you.